This is the new ASUS ROG Ally X, and while it's not technically an Ally 2, it introduces several smaller yet still very significant hardware upgrades that make it a far more reliable and, in my opinion, more refined Windows handheld gaming machine that fixes basically everything I didn't like about the original ROG Ally. With more RAM, a battery that's twice as large, improved thermals, and even improved I/O, there's a lot to get excited about with the new ASUS ROG Ally X. But is it worth $799? But before getting into those upgrades, let's talk about the things that remain unchanged. The Ally X uses the same AMD Z1 Extreme chipset and the same 500 nit 7-inch 120Hz VRR touchscreen with 7 millisecond response time and AMD FreeSync Premium. And while it would have been great to see the upcoming Strix mobile chips make their way into the new Ally X, there's also a good chance that it would have increased the Ally's price point as well as pushed back its release date. Now, because of this, gaming performance is probably going to be about on par with its predecessor, although there are some of those other hardware tweaks that we'll get into that do help give it a slight edge. Perhaps most surprisingly, however, is the unchanged display. Don't get me wrong, it's still good, but side by side with something newer like the Steam Deck OLED, and you'll quickly notice the difference in brightness and contrast. More than that though, one of the biggest strengths of some of their other Ally competitors, including the Legion Go and now the new MSI Claw 8 Plus, is a larger display. Obviously that would come at the expense of portability, but I know a lot of gamers, myself included, who would have preferred having a larger display for some games and content. I pre-ordered my original ROG Ally and have been using it as my daily gaming PC for almost a year now. And even though I've been a huge fan of it and long time argued that it's the best gaming handheld for most people, there are still a few things that irk me about it. Testing the new Ally X though, I immediately appreciated a lot of its upgrades. Arguably the most significant improvement is the increase to faster 24GB LPDDR5X 75MHz RAM, up from the 16GB LPDDR5 6400MHz RAM. The 16GB of shared RAM on the Ally was quickly becoming a bottleneck in a lot of AAA titles, including Red Dead Redemption 2 and Alan Wake 2, which even on lower settings would frequently slow down or crash depending on the settings you were playing at. The Ally X's upgraded RAM should hopefully allow games to run smoother and possibly might give it a slight boost to frames per second. Now, if you're like me, you've got a lot of games. One of the first things I did with my original Ally was upgrade its M.2 2230 512GB SSD to a 2TB drive. With the Ally X now though, it supports full-length M.2 2280 PCIe 4 SSDs, which isn't only cheaper overall, but it supports higher capacities up to a massive 8TB. That's a lot of games. In my opinion, that alone could help offset and justify the higher $799 price tag of the Ally X, if you're trying to decide between the two. Another welcome change is the switch to a second USB-C port at the top instead of the proprietary XG Mobile eGPU port that it replaces on the original. This new port supports Thunderbolt 4, giving you access to DisplayPort 4, video output, and a wider selection of eGPU solutions if you want that additional horsepower when you're not on the go. But aside from that, at the very least, you can now easily connect to your other accessories, whether that's external storage or peripherals, without tying up your only port with charging. Speaking of charging, both ports now support up to 100-watt fast power delivery. Interestingly though, in the box you're still getting a 60-watt charger, so you will need to buy another one, 100-watt or faster from ASUS or a third-party solution if you want to take advantage of those full charging speeds. Through a lot of weight and space savings with the chassis, circuit board, and even the cooling system, ASUS opened themselves up to fitting a larger 80-watt-hour battery, double of the originals. And that's huge. Especially when you're on the go and you don't have access to power outlets, that extra capacity combined with the other efficiency improvements should mean we're actually getting more than double battery life. In more demanding titles, you could easily deplete the battery in 50 minutes or less. But now, with the new Ally X, that could turn into roughly 2 hours or even more. Even with those weight shavings though, with the larger battery and the altogether slightly larger chassis, it does mean that the Ally X is a little bit larger and heavier than the original Ally. It's not too noticeable in hands, and actually altogether it does feel more ergonomic, but it does bring its total weight to about 678 grams now, which does make it lose its once weight-saving advantage that it did have over the Steam Deck OLED. Aside from that, ASUS has made some other quality of life improvements, including an 8-direction D-pad, more refined joysticks, improved triggers and paddles, as well as rear paddles that are harder to accidentally trigger. For the most part, if you're already familiar with the original Ally, then the X isn't necessarily going to blow you away. But if you're also aware of the original's quirks and at times serious limitations, then the Ally X manages to address, if not fix, most of them. And because of that, I'm curious to see if this is going to be the device that pushes people who were on the fence about trying handhelds in the first place to finally give it a chance. Until we get a final production unit in hand for more extensive testing, I think it's reasonable to predict that with a combination of faster and increased RAM, as well as better heat dissipation thanks to those newer fans, this could deliver anywhere from 5 to 10% improved performance compared to its predecessor. Although performance improvements with the Ally X is going to be relatively minor, this is undoubtedly a better Ally and gaming handheld in every way, except for, of course, the increased weight and the fact that we don't have a white color this year. The Ally X's $799 price tag isn't too surprising, especially given the increased storage and other hardware improvements. That said, if you were on the fence about buying the original Ally, which is now heavily discounted, it might be a little bit more appealing now. But let me know what you think about the new ASUS ROG Ally X. Is this going to be one of the best gaming handhelds that you can get today, or will it be worth waiting until AMD's new chipset makes their way into these kind of devices? For more awesome Computex coverage, be sure to follow our live blog over at tomsguide.com and follow us everywhere at socials at tomsguide. You can also follow me to see what cool tech I'm looking at next, and until the next one, I'll catch you later.